The glittering halls of the Hofburg Palace in Vienna once held the immense power of the Habsburg Empire, a dynasty that shaped Europe for centuries. Their world was one of opulence, ancient tradition, and seemingly endless influence. But behind the grandeur, a darker, more fragile reality often played out. For every celebrated emperor and empress, there were countless young lives born into unimaginable privilege, who met ends so sudden, so heartbreaking. They cast long shadows over the imperial family. These are the untold stories, the quiet despair hidden beneath the crown, where youth and hope tragically faded away long before their time. These are the tales of 8 Habsburg Archdukes, heirs, and hopefuls, whose lives were cut short in ways that shocked their era and continue to resonate with the chilling sorrow today. Number 8. The tender fading of Leopold Johann. In the lavish and intricately decorated chambers of the Hofburg Palace, where tapestries depicted glorious battles and ceilings shimmered with gilded frescoes, a profound stillness often descended. This was especially true in the nursery's places of hopeful expectation, but also of a terrible, ever-present dread. In the late 17th century, medical understanding was rudimentary, and the tiniest of infections could sweep through a household, sparing no one, not even the children of emperors. This was the world into which Archduke Leopold Johann was born on April 13, 1670. His father was the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I, a monarch whose reign would be long and significant, marked by wars and political maneuvering across the continent. His mother was Empress Margarita Teresa, a Spanish infanta, whose delicate health was already a concern within the imperial court. The birth of a new archduke was always an occasion for quiet celebration, a small sigh of relief for the continuation of the dynastic line, especially in an era when infant mortality rates were frighteningly high, even among the nobility. Leopold Johann was a tiny bundle of imperial hope, his cries echoing softly in the palace, a sound that brought a brief moment of joy to his parents. He was the 5th child born to Leopold, the first and Margarita Teresa. But already the shadow of loss hung over their nursery. Their first son, Ferdinand Wenzel, had died in 1667 at the age of 1. Their third child, Maria Anna Antonia, had died in 1669, also an infant. Each loss was a cruel blow, a reminder of the fragility of life, even for those who seemed to possess everything. The parents, especially the Empress, were deeply affected by these bereavements. They watched Leopold Johann with a mixture of adoration and apprehension, hoping that this child, at least, would be granted a full life. The young Archduke's early days were like those of many royal infants. He was attended by a retinue of wet nurses, governesses, and servants, all dedicated to his well-being. The palace buzzed with a quiet activity around him, ensuring his comfort and safety, but the invisible enemy of disease lurked everywhere. Smallpox, a terrifying scourge, frequently swept through cities and towns, claiming victims of all ages, leaving survivors scarred and weakened. It was a disease that recognized no social boundaries. No royal decree could ward off its deadly embrace. Despite all the precautions, the warmth of the swaddling clothes, the careful preparation of food, the best efforts of the court physicians, the microscopic invaders found their way. As the spring of 1670 turned into early summer, a subtle change was noticed in the young Archduke Leopold. Johann, a slight fever, a cough, then the telltale rash that sent a chill through the imperial household. The dreaded smallpox had arrived. The court physicians, learned men for their time, gathered prescribing various remedies, offering prayers, but their knowledge was limited. They could do little more than observe, offer palliative care and hope. Empress Margarita Teresa herself, frail, was consumed with worry. She spent hours by her son's crib, her heart aching with the familiar pain of watching a child struggle against an invisible adversary. Emperor Leopold I, usually preoccupied with affairs of state, also found himself drawn to the nursery, his stoic demeanor momentarily faltering in the face of his son's suffering. The disease progressed with a relentless cruelty. The initial hope that it might be a mild case quickly faded. Leopold Johann grew weaker, his tiny body racked by fever, his skin covered in the characteristic pustules. The palace grew silent, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by hushed whispers and the quiet prayers of the court. The air became heavy with unspoken fears. The family knew the grim statistics, the low chances of survival for infants afflicted with smallpox. Yet they clung to every fleeting moment of life, every shallow breath the Archduke took. On August 4, 1670, just 4 months after his birth, Archduke Leopold Johann succumbed to the disease. His brief life, which began with a quiet hope, ended with an equally quiet yet profoundly sorrowful final breath. The news spread through the Hofburg, not with the dramatic shock of a sudden assassination, but with the weary resignation of a fate all too common for the era. Another child, another Archduke, had been lost to the pervasive illnesses of the time. The imperial parents were once again plunged into mourning, their joy overshadowed by the persistent sorrow of parental grief. The death of Leopold Johann was a private tragedy for the imperial family, one of many infant losses they would endure. It highlighted the vulnerability of even the most powerful dynasties to the natural world. No amount of wealth or power could shield these tiny royals from the diseases that ravaged society. His burial was a somber affair, his small casket carried to the imperial crypt in Vienna, a resting place for generations of Habsburgs. There he joined his elder siblings who had also died young. His short life served as a poignant reminder that even in the grandest palaces, beneath the most glittering crowns, the human heart grappled with the same fragile existence and the same profound sorrows as any other. His brief existence, a mere flicker in the vast tapestry of Habsburg history, was a silent testament to the hidden pain behind the imperial facade. The dynasty would continue, new heirs would be born, but the loss of Leopold Johann, like that of many before and after him, left an indelible mark on the family's collective memory. A quiet, mournful note in the symphony of their powerful reign. Number 7. A fading flicker of imperial hope. The early 19th century still presented formidable challenges to childhood survival, even for those born into the highest echelons of society. Medical science was advancing, but slowly, and many common ailments remained untreatable, often proving fatal to the very young. It was into this world that Archduke Ferdinand Karl Anton was born on April 27, 1835. His father was Ferdinand I, who would soon ascend to the throne as Emperor of Austria. His mother was Empress Maria Anna of Savoy. The birth of a son to the imperial couple was always an event of significant dynastic importance. Ferdinand I, though a gentle and benevolent ruler, was known for his delicate health and a certain degree of intellectual disability, which meant the hope for his busted, healthy heir was paramount for the stability of the vast Habsburg domains. The baby, Ferdinand Karl Anton, his arrival was met with quiet relief within the court, as he was the first and only son born to Emperor Ferdinand I. His birth ensured for a brief moment the continuation of the direct line, a vital consideration for any European monarchy. The nursery within the Hofburg Palace, a place of hushed activity and devoted care, became his world. Attendants fluttered around him, ensuring his every need was met. The finest linens swaddled him, the most nutritious milk was provided by his wet nurse, and the most learned physicians were on standby, ready to address any sign of distress. The air in the imperial apartments, usually thick with the scent of beeswax and old wood, now carried the faint, sweet smell of a new baby. His parents, Emperor Ferdinand and Empress Maria Anna, despite their public duties, undoubtedly found moments of private joy and affection with their newborn. The future of the empire, a complex tapestry of diverse peoples and territories, seemed to rest in some small way upon the health and development of this tiny infant. Plans, though unspoken and distant, would have been made for his education, his future role, the responsibilities he would one day inherit. Every gurgle, every stretch, Every slight movement was observed, interpreted, and perhaps celebrated with quiet hope. However, the shadow of uncertainty that plagued all infant lives in that era soon began to loom over young Ferdinand Karl Anton. As the summer of 1835 approached, a worrying change was observed in the tiny Archduke. His health, initially robust, began to falter. The exact nature of his illness remained somewhat shrouded in the historical records, often simply described as a severe fever or an unknown infantile disease, common diagnostic terms for the time when specific passions were not yet understood. His small body grew weak, his breathing became shallow, and the usual signs of infant vitality slowly dimmed. The court physicians were summoned, their faces etched with concern. They consulted, debated, and applied the limited remedies available to them. Poultices were prepared, medicinal concoctions administered, and prayers offered in earnest by the devoted attendants and the imperial family. The Hofburg, usually a hive of political activity and social engagements, grew quiet with worry. The emperor and empress spent anxious hours by their son's cradle watching his struggle with profound sorrow. They understood the fragility of life, but the pain of seeing their only son, their heir, fade before their eyes was a unique agony. The days stretched into weeks, each one bringing more distress. The hopeful whispers that accompanied his birth were replaced by mournful silence. The medical efforts proved futile against the relentless progression of the illness. Despite all the care, the devotion, and the best available medical attention of the time, the young Archduke Ferdinand Karl Anton could not be saved. On July 24, 1835, just shy of 3 months old, the tiny Archduke passed away. His death was a quiet, private sorrow that reverberated through the imperial family and the court. The news, though not publicly sensationalized, was a blow to the dynastic aspirations. The brief flicker of hope he represented was extinguished. His father, Emperor Ferdinand I, would ultimately be succeeded, not by his own son, but by his nephew, Franz Joseph, whose long reign would define the later years of the empire. The passing of Archduke Ferdinand Karl Anton underscored the continued vulnerability of the imperial line to natural causes. His short life served as a stark reminder of the ever-present threat of disease, a force that could humble even the mightiest of empires. He was laid to rest in the imperial crypt in Vienna, joining many other young Habsburgs whose lives were cut short by the pervasive ailments of their era. His brief existence, a mere footnote in the grand annals of the Habsburgs, represented a quiet tragedy, a personal grief for his parents, and a testament to the unyielding power of nature over even the most royal of bloodlines. His small, forgotten grave was a silent witness to the perpetual struggle between dynastic ambition and the unpredictable fragility of life itself. Number 6. The unseen shadow over imperial cradles. The Habsburg dynasty, stretching back centuries, saw countless births and often just as many early deaths among its youngest members. Despite their immense wealth, vast palaces, and access to the best physicians of their age, imperial children were as susceptible to the ravages of disease as any other. The mid-19th century, while witnessing scientific and industrial progress, still struggled against the relentless tide of infectious illnesses, especially those that preyed on infants. Into this precarious world was born Archduke Albrecht Franz on July 14, 1844. His father was Archduke Albrecht, Duke of Teschen, a prominent and influential figure within the imperial family, renowned for his military prowess and staunch loyalty to the crown. His mother was Princess Hildegard of Bavaria, a woman of grace and intelligence. The birth of Albrecht Franz was a moment of quiet joy for his parents, a new addition to their family. While not in the direct line of succession to the imperial throne, as his father was a cousin to the reigning emperor, Ferdinand I, the birth of a healthy male child was always celebrated. It signified the continued strength and vitality of the broader Habsburg family, a vast network of relatives whose influence stretched across Europe. The nursery in their grand residence, likely the Palais Albrecht in Vienna, would have been prepared with all the care and attention befitting a royal infant. The finest textiles, the most dedicated nurses, and the watchful eyes of experienced nannies surrounded young Albrecht Franz. His early days would have been spent in the gentle routines of an aristocratic childhood filled with soft light and hushed voices. His parents, particularly Princess Hildegard, undoubtedly found immense pleasure in their new son, dreaming of the life he would lead, the education he would receive, and the potential contributions. They would have observed his growth with hopeful anticipation, noting every milestone, every smile, every sign of developing personality. For a brief period, the household resonated with the delicate sounds of a baby's presence, a sweet, fleeting melody. However, as was so often the case in those times, a sudden and insidious threat began to materialize. As the late summer of 1844 transitioned into autumn, a worrying change was noted in young Archduke Albrecht Franz. The exact nature of his ailment, like many infant deaths of the era, was not precisely recorded with modern medical terminology. It was often attributed simply to a severe fever, a sudden illness, or what might have been described as a general decline. These broad descriptions masked the true and often virulent infections that swept through populations, particularly affecting the most vulnerable. The devoted nurses and the family physicians were immediately alerted. They applied the limited remedies available, attempting to soothe the fever, alleviate discomfort, and encourage the tiny body to fight off the unseen enemy. The atmosphere in the Palais Albrecht would have grown heavy with anxiety. The parents, Archduke Albrecht and Princess Hildegard, watched helplessly as their infant son struggled. Their personal grief, like that of any parents facing such a crisis, would have been profound, agonizing in its powerlessness. They clung to hope, even as the signs grew increasingly grim. Despite all efforts, despite the constant vigil and the fervent prayers, the illness proved relentless. The young Archduke's strength ebbed away. His breathing became shallower, his movements more infrequent, until he finally ceased to breathe. On December 16, 1844, just 5 months after his birth, Archduke Albrecht Franz passed away. His life, so brief and full of unfulfilled promise, ended in the quiet solitude of his nursery. The news brought a wave of sorrow to his parents and the wider imperial family. His death was a poignant reminder, yet again, of the precariousness of life. Even for those born into the highest echelons of society, the grand lineage of the Habsburgs, for all its power and prestige, remains subject to the same biological vulnerabilities as anyone else. The short life of Albrecht Franz, like those of so many royal infants before him, was recorded in the family registers as another loss, another extinguished flame in the long line of succession. He was laid to rest in the imperial crypt in Vienna, his tiny casket finding its place among centuries of ancestors, a silent testament to the countless children who never had the chance to grow. His story, though largely forgotten, amidst the grand narratives of emperors and empires, stands as a quiet, somber footnote. It speaks to the private heartaches experienced behind the gilded walls of the Hofburg, and its satellite palaces, a constant undercurrent of grief flowing beneath the surface of imperial splendor. His death was a silent lament, a poignant echo of the numerous unwritten tragedies of the Habsburg nursery. Number 5. The unfulfilled promise of the emperor's son. The late 19th century in the Austro-Hungarian Empire was an era of paradoxes. On one hand, it was a time of burgeoning modernity, with new technologies, medical advancements, and cultural flourishes making their mark. On the other, it was an age still grappling with ancient diseases and the persistent unyielding sorrow of early death, even within the most privileged circles. Emperor Franz Joseph I, a figure of immense stoicism and dedication, had already endured profound personal losses throughout his long reign. His mother, his brothers, and several of his children had already passed before their time. Each new birth, therefore, brought a mixture of hope and trepidation. It was into this world on April 20th, 1878, that Archduke Karl Franz Joseph was born. He was the son of Emperor Franz Joseph I and his beloved, but often distant, Empress Elizabeth, renowned for her beauty and restless spirit. The arrival of a new archduke was always a moment of quiet ceremony and official protocol within the Hofburg palace. Karl was the fourth son of the emperor and empress, though only one of his elder brothers, the controversial crown prince, Rudolf, survived to adulthood. The imperial couple had also lost a daughter, Sophie, in early childhood. This history of loss meant that the birth of Karl was met with a heightened sense of cautious optimism. The imperial nursery, a series of comfortable yet austere rooms within the sprawling palace, became the young archduke's domain. He was surrounded by a devoted staff, nurses, governesses, and the watchful eyes of court physicians. The meticulous routines of royal childcare were observed with precision, aiming to protect the infant from every possible harm. His parents, despite their demanding public roles and often strained relationship, would have visited him, observing his development, hoping for a healthy future for this newest addition to their family. The presence of a new baby, with his soft cooing and tiny movements, would have offered a fleeting respite from the burdens of empire. Archduke Karl's first few months unfolded like those of many royal infants. He was doted upon, celebrated in the privacy of the court, and grew steadily, seemingly robust and healthy. His cries filled the nursery, a sound that brought a measure of joy and a sense of continuity to the imperial household. The empire, with its complex political landscape and its ever-present internal tensions, continued its grand dance around the quiet, protected world of the infant archduke. He was a symbol of hope, potential future, however distant, for the enduring Habsburg line. However, the late 19th century, for all its progress, still had no effective treatment for many infectious diseases that preyed on the young. The shadow of these unseen enemies constantly loomed. As the summer of 1878 progressed, a subtle, then increasingly alarming change was noted in young Archduke Karl. He developed a fever, and his condition rapidly deteriorated. The symptoms, though not precisely detailed in public records, pointed to a severe infection, likely meningitis, and inflammation of the membranes surrounding the brain and spinal cord, which was often fatal in infants during that era. The palace was plunged into a state of intense anxiety. The imperial physicians, the best in the realm, were summoned immediately. They applied their knowledge and their limited remedies, but their efforts often proved futile against such aggressive diseases. The emperor and empress, despite their personal challenges, were united in their worry for their son. Empress Elizabeth, known for her deep melancholia and her preference for solitude, would have been particularly distressed. She had already lost a daughter to illness, and the prospect of another child's death was a crushing burden. Franz Joseph, ever the pragmatist, would have nonetheless felt the profound sorrow of a father watching his child suffer. The struggle was brief, but intense. The young archduke's condition worsened rapidly. The fever raged, and his small body convulsed. The despair in the nursery was palpable. A heavy silence broken only by hushed commands and the labored breathing of the child. Despite all the medical interventions and the fervent prayers, his tiny life slipped away. On October 6, 1878, just 6 months after his birth, Archduke Karl Franz Joseph died. His death was a quiet tragedy within the imperial household. Another profound loss for Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elizabeth. It was not a death that shook the foundations of the empire, as he was not in the direct line of succession for the throne after Crown Prince Rudolf. However, it was a deeply personal blow, a reinforcement of the emperor's stoic acceptance of personal tragedy, and another source of grief for the already melancholic empress. His passing underscored the persistent vulnerability of the imperial family to the same devastating illnesses that afflicted ordinary citizens. Even the absolute power and immense resources of the Habsburg monarchy could not guarantee the health or longevity of its children. Archduke Karl was laid to rest in the imperial crypt in Vienna, a solemn place where countless Habsburgs, young and old, found their final repose. His brief life, a mere blink in the long history of the dynasty, became another testament to the hidden sorrows behind the imperial facade. His grave, small and unassuming amidst the grander tombs, was a silent monument to the enduring pain of infant mortality, a stark reminder that even for the rulers of empires, joy was often fleeting, and sorrow a constant companion. His unfulfilled promise hung like a silent lament in the grand, echoing halls of the Hofburg. Number 4. The wild spirit and tragic end of Otto Franz. Archduke Otto Franz Joseph Karl Ludwig Maria of Austria was born on April 21, 1865, into a world poised on the brink of significant change. He was the nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph I and the younger brother of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who would one day become the fateful heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Otto's parents were Archduke Karl Ludwig and Princess Maria Annunziata of Bourbon, Two Sicilies. From an early age, Otto displayed a vibrant, almost rebellious spirit, a stark contrast to the rigid decorum and solemnity that characterized the Habsburg court. He was handsome, monodic, and possessed a devil-may-care attitude that often put him at odds with the strictures of imperial life. As a young man, Otto quickly earned a reputation as a notorious bon vivant. He was known for his extravagant lifestyle, his love of fast horses, beautiful women, and late nights, while his elder brother, Franz Ferdinand, was diligent and somewhat reclusive. Otto embraced every pleasure Vienna had to offer. Tales of his escapades, often scandalous and much whispered about, spread through the city. He was seen at the finest restaurants, the most exclusive clubs, and the opera houses, always surrounded by an entourage of friends and admirers. His charm was undeniable, his wit quick, and his disregard for convention legendary. One famous anecdote, often recounted in hushed tones, spoke of him riding his horse stark naked down the Ringstrasse, Vienna's grand boulevard, in broad daylight. Another involved him attempting to ride a bicycle through the grand halls of the Hofburg Palace, an act of sheer irreverence in a place steeped in tradition. Such stories, whether entirely accurate or embellished by rumor, painted a vivid picture of a young archduke determined to live life on his own terms, unbound by the gilded cage of his royal birth. While amusing to some, these antics often exasperated Emperor Franz Joseph, who valued duty and decorum above all else. Otto's behavior was a constant source of embarrassment and concern for the elderly monarch and the more conservative elements of the court. Despite his wild ways, Otto was a figure of considerable presence. He was married to Princess Maria Josepha of Saxony in 1886, a union intended to bring some stability to his life and provide heirs to the dynasty. They had two sons, Archduke Karl, who would later become emperor, Charles I, the last Habsburg ruler, and Archduke Maximilian Eugen. However, marriage did little to curb Otto's hedonistic tendencies. His marital life was reportedly strained, and he continued his extravagant pursuits, often frequenting the notorious red light districts of Vienna. The consequences of such a lifestyle eventually began to take their toll. In the late 1890s, whispers began to circulate about Otto's failing health. The exact nature of his illness was kept highly secret within the imperial court. As it carried a significant social stigma, it became increasingly clear that he was suffering from the debilitating effects of syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease that in its advanced stages could lead to severe neurological. At the time, there was no effective cure for syphilis, and its progression was often slow, painful, and ultimately fatal. Otto's once robust and handsome physique began to waste away. His vibrant energy faded, replaced by weakness, pain, and increasing mental confusion. The man who had once ridden naked through the streets of Vienna now often lay in bed, struggling with the ravages of his illness. The scandals that once swirled around his wild adventures were replaced by a quiet, pervasive pity, and then a profound sense of sadness. His brother Franz Ferdinand, who would become his heir presumptive after Crown Prince Rudolf's death, watched his decline with a mixture of fraternal concern and perhaps a sense of grim inevitability regarding the consequences of his brother's lifestyle. The final years of Archduke Otto Franz were marked by intense suffering. His once charming features became distorted by the disease, and he reportedly had to undergo several painful operations. His voice, once full of laughter and wit, became a whisper. He moved from one sanatorium to another, seeking relief that never truly came. The grand palaces of Vienna, once the scene of his flamboyant exploits, now seemed like sterile, silent prisons. The contrast between his youthful exuberance and his slow, agonizing decline was stark and heartbreaking. On November 1st, 1906, Archduke Otto Franz died in Vienna. His death, while perhaps not unexpected to those close to him, still sent a wave of somber reflection through the imperial court and Viennese society. The official cause of death was often vaguely attributed to syphilitic degeneration or simply illness of the liver. The details of his long battle and its origins were carefully obscured from the public to protect the reputation of the imperial family. Otto's tragic end served as a cautionary tale, a stark example of the dangers of unchecked indulgence, even for those born to immense privilege. His life, marked by both dazzling charisma and profound self-destruction, left behind a complicated legacy. He was remembered as the handsome Archduke, a symbol of rebellion against the rigid Habsburg conventions, but also as a victim of his own choices and the limitations of medicine in his era. His story was a poignant reminder that even within the glittering world of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, private suffering and tragic ends were never far from the surface, often hidden beneath a carefully constructed veneer of imperial grandeur. He left behind 2 sons, one of whom would inherit a crumbling empire just a few years later. A poignant and ironic continuation of the family line from a life lived so recklessly. Number 3. The prince who sailed into oblivion. Archduke Johann Salvator of Austria was born on November 25, 1852. A son of Grand Duke Leopold II of Tuscany. As a member of the Tuscan branch of the Habsburg family, he was a cousin to Emperor Franz Joseph. The first, Johann was known for his sharp intellect, artistic inclinations, and a fiercely independent spirit that chafed against the rigid protocols of imperial life. Unlike many of his more traditional relatives, he possessed a restless, adventurous soul, deeply interested in modern ideas and technological advancements. He harbored a particular passion for the sea, a calling that seemed at odds with his landlocked aristocratic heritage. From a young age, Johann found the structured existence of a Habsburg archduke stifling. He sought education beyond the standard military training, studying various subjects, including law and finance, and developed a keen interest in naval matters. He embarked on several voyages, quickly becoming a skilled sailor and an accomplished naval officer. His talents were recognized, and he rose through the ranks, eventually commanding his own ships. This was not merely a hobby, it was a serious pursuit, and he contributed to naval strategy and ship design, even patenting a new design for a warship. Johann Salvator was also a close friend and confidant of Crown Prince Rudolf, the troubled heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. They shared a liberal outlook, a disdain for the conservative court, and a mutual fascination with science and progress. This friendship deepened in the years leading up to the Marling incident, and Johann was among the few people Rudolf trusted implicitly. The Crown Prince's tragic death in 1889, which the court officially declared a suicide, profoundly affected Johann Salvator. He was one of the first to arrive at Marling after the deaths, and was instrumental in the initial cover-up, a role that brought him into direct conflict with the emperor and the rigid imperial establishment. The death of Rudolf was a turning point for Johann Salvator. He became even more disillusioned with the monarchy and the life he was expected to lead. He felt trapped by his title and the constant scrutiny that came with being a Habsburg. He yearned for true freedom, a life unburdened by imperial expectations. This desire for liberation led him to make a drastic decision. In December 1889, less than a year after Rudolf's death, Johann Salvator formally renounced his title, his rights of succession, and all privileges associated with his Habsburg birth. He changed his name to Johann Orth, adopting the surname of the small Castle Schloss, Orth, near Jeanlunden, that he owned. This act was unprecedented and caused a sensation across Europe. No Habsburg Archduke had ever willingly abandoned his princely status in such a public and definitive way. Johann Orth intended to live a new life as a commoner, free to pursue his passions without the constraints of his former identity. He married Ludmilla Stubel, a former opera dancer in London, a union that was considered morganatic and further scandalized the court, as it was a marriage far beneath his former station. He then purchased a steamship, which he christened the Santa Margherita, and prepared for a grand voyage, a journey to a new life, perhaps in South America. He envisioned a life of exploration, adventure, and freedom on the open seas. In the spring of 1890, Johann Orth and his wife, along with a small crew, set sail from Hamburg. Their destination was initially planned for Buenos Aires, Argentina. The journey was fraught with challenges from the outset. The Santa Margherita was not a particularly robust vessel, and the crew was small. Johann, despite his sailing experience, was embarking on a treacherous transatlantic journey in a ship ill-suited for the harsh conditions of the South Atlantic. After leaving the port of Montevideo, Uruguay, on July 13, 1890, bound for Valparaiso, Chile, via Cape Horn, the Santa Margherita and all its occupants vanished. Bio Cape Horn. The notoriously dangerous waters around Cape Horn, with their treacherous storms, towering waves, and icy winds, were a formidable challenge even for experienced sailors in well-equipped vessels. A severe storm was reported in the region around the time the Santa Margherita would have been attempting to round the Cape. No distress signals were ever received, no wreckage was ever found, and no survivors ever emerged. For years, rumors and theories circulated about Johann Orth's disappearance. Some believed he had staged his own vanishing act to truly escape his past, perhaps living a quiet life under a new identity in some remote corner of the world. Others suggested foul play, given his controversial past and his knowledge of the. However, the most widely accepted explanation, and the one supported by naval experts, was that the Santa Margherita simply succumbed to the overwhelming power of the sea off Cape Horn. The ship and its occupants were likely swallowed by the raging waters, becoming another tragic statistic of maritime history. In 1911, 2 decades after his disappearance, Archduke Johann Salvator, or Johann Orth as he had wished to be known, was officially declared dead. His fate remained one of the enduring mysteries of the Habsburg dynasty. His life was a testament to the powerful yearning for personal freedom in an era of strict royal protocol, and his disappearance became a poignant symbol of a prince who, in seeking to escape his gilded cage, found instead an ultimate watery oblivion. His story, a blend of adventure, rebellion, and ultimate tragedy, remains one of the most captivating and sorrowful chapters in the long and complex history of the Habsburgs. He chose to sail away from an empire that could not contain him, only to be lost to the boundless, unforgiving ocean. Number 2. The ill-fated Emperor of Mexico. Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian Joseph was born on July 6, 1832. In Vienna, the second son of Archduke Franz, Karl and Princess Sophie of Bavaria. He was the younger brother of Emperor Franz Joseph I. From a young age, Maximilian was characterized by a sensitive and artistic temperament, a keen intellect, and a romantic idealism that often clashed with the pragmatic and traditional world of the Habsburg court. He possessed a love for the arts, sciences, and exploration, and an inherent kindness that endeared him to many. Unlike his disciplined and duty-bound elder brother Maximilian was drawn to a life of intellectual pursuits and grand ventures. Maximilian pursued a distinguished career in the Imperial Austrian Navy, rising quickly through the ranks to become its commander-in-chief at a remarkably young age. He modernized the fleet, promoted scientific expeditions, and established naval bases, demonstrating a genuine talent for leadership and administration. His passion for the sea and for distant lands was palpable. He built the magnificent Miramar Castle overlooking the Adriatic Sea near Trieste, a stunning blend of European romanticism and exotic influences, reflecting his longing for a world beyond the confines of Vienna. In 1857, he married Princess Charlotte of Belgium, an intelligent, ambitious, and equally idealistic young woman who shared his dreams of a grand destiny. Maximilian's romantic idealism, however, eventually led him down a perilous path. In the early 1860s, a delegation of Mexican monarchists, with the support of Emperor Napoleon III of France, offered Maximilian the crown of Mexico. Mexico, a nation plagued by internal strife and foreign intervention, was seen by Napoleon III as an opportunity to establish a Catholic-friendly empire in the Americas and assert French influence. For Maximilian, the offer presented an irresistible allure, a chance to build a modern, enlightened empire, to implement progressive reforms, and to escape the constrained life of a European archduke. Despite warnings from his brother Franz Joseph, who understood the inherent instability of Mexican politics and the precariousness of French support, Maximilian, swayed by his own idealism and Charlotte's ambition, accepted the offer in 1864. He renounced his rights to the Austrian throne and sailed for Mexico. Upon their arrival, Maximilian and Charlotte were greeted with a mixture of enthusiasm and skepticism. They established their court in Mexico City, attempting to implement liberal reforms, promote education, and modernize the country's infrastructure. Maximilian, against the expectations of his conservative supporters, attempted to bridge the divide between the warring factions of monarchists and republicans, even adopting some of the liberal policies of his republican predecessor, Benito Juárez. He genuinely wished to be a benevolent ruler for the Mexican people. However, the reality of ruling Mexico proved far more complex and brutal than Maximilian had imagined. His empire faced constant rebellion from republican forces led by Juárez. The political landscape was deeply fractured, and the majority of the population remained loyal to the republican ideal. Crucially, the French military support upon which Maximilian's throne entirely depended began to waver. As the American Civil War concluded in 1865, the United States, upholding the Monroe Doctrine, demanded the withdrawal of French troops from Mexico. Faced with growing pressure at home and abroad, Napoleon III began to pull his forces out in 1866, leaving Maximilian dangerously exposed. Charlotte, realizing the gravity of their situation, bravely traveled back to Europe in a desperate attempt to secure support from Napoleon III, the Pope, and other European monarchs. Her pleas were met with indifference or outright refusal. The strain of the mission, combined with the growing realization of their abandonment, took a terrible toll on her mental health. She suffered a complete mental collapse, descending into paranoia and delusion, and would spend the rest of her long life in various stages of mental incapacitation, never returning to Mexico. Left alone, abandoned by his French allies, and facing an overwhelming Republican army, Maximilian was urged by his loyal generals and friends to abdicate and flee. Many foreign diplomats offered him safe passage, but the Archduke, with his rigid sense of honor and an almost fatalistic idealism, refused to abandon his imperial duty. He believed it would be an act of cowardice and a betrayal of the Mexican people who had in his mind placed their trust in him. He made a stand in Querétaro, where he and his loyalist forces were besieged. After a prolonged struggle, he was betrayed and captured by Republican forces in May 1867. Maximilian was swiftly tried by a military court and sentenced to death for treason. Despite international appeals for clemency from European monarchs, including his own brother Franz Joseph and prominent figures like Victor Hugo and Giuseppe Garibaldi, Benito Juárez, the Republican leader, refused to commute the sentence. Juarez understood that only a clear and decisive act could firmly establish Mexican sovereignty and put an end to foreign intervention, once and for all. On June 19, 1867, at dawn, Archduke Maximilian, the Emperor of Mexico, stood before a firing squad on the Cerro de las Campanas, a hill outside Querétaro. Dressed in a dark suit, calm and dignified, he faced his executioners with composure. He distributed gold coins to the soldiers, asking them to aim for his heart so that his death would be swift. His last words, reportedly, were Mexicans. May my blood be the last shed for the prosperity of the country. If it should be necessary for my people to shed more, may it flow no more, and may it be for good, not for evil. Viva Mexico. Viva Independencia. The execution of Maximilian sent shockwaves across Europe, particularly within the imperial courts. It was an unprecedented act, the execution of a reigning European monarch, even if self-proclaimed and supported by foreign intervention. For the Habsburgs, it was a profound humiliation and a personal tragedy. His death marked the end of the Second Mexican Empire and solidified Mexico's republican identity. For Maximilian, his grand romantic dream of empire ended in a harsh, unforgiving reality, a testament to the perils of idealism when confronted by Ghislaine realities. His tragic fate became a powerful cautionary tale of imperial ambition gone horribly wrong, a somber footnote in the annals of both Habsburg and Mexican history. His death echoed through the grand halls of Vienna, a chilling reminder of the costs of distant crowns. Number 1. The Shadow over Mayerling. Archduke Rudolf Franz Karl Joseph, Crown Prince of Austria, Hungary and Bohemia, was born on August 21, 1858. He was the only son of Emperor Franz Joseph I and Empress Elizabeth. From his earliest days, Rudolf was burdened by the immense expectations of his imperial birth. He was destined to inherit one of the largest and most complex empires in Europe, and his education was meticulously planned to prepare him for this formidable role. However, despite his intelligence and quick wit, Rudolf possessed a sensitive, melancholic temperament that often clashed with the rigid traditions and conservative nature of the Habsburg court. As he grew, Rudolf developed strong liberal leanings, a deep interest in science, and a progressive worldview that frequently put him at odds with his conservative father, Emperor Franz Joseph. Rudolf advocated for modernization, scientific advancement, and a more conciliatory approach to the empire's diverse nationalities. He wrote articles for newspapers under pseudonyms, expressing his reformist ideas, often criticizing the very institutions he was destined to lead. He surrounded himself with intellectuals, scientists, and journalists who shared his progressive outlook, finding intellectual kinship that was absent in his formal court life. His relationship with his parents was strained. His mother, Empress Elizabeth, though beautiful and Medoc, was emotionally distant and often preoccupied with her own restless pursuits and escapes from court life. His father, the emperor, was a man of duty and tradition, who found his son's rebellious spirit and liberal ideas deeply unsettling. This fundamental disagreement on the future direction of the empire created a significant rift between father and son, leaving Rudolf feeling increasingly isolated and misunderstood within his own family. In 1881, Rudolf married Princess Stephanie of Belgium, a politically advantageous match intended to secure the succession and stabilize his personal life. They had a daughter, Archduchess Elizabeth Marie, known as Erzi. However, the marriage was not a happy one. Rudolf found Stephanie intellectually unstimulating and their personalities clashed. He continued to seek companionship and solace outside his marriage, engaging in numerous affairs and living a life increasingly marked by a sense of disillusionment and inner turmoil. He experimented with alcohol and morphine, likely to alleviate his profound melancholia and the increasing physical pain from what may have been venereal disease, which he contracted and tragically passed on to his wife, rendering her infertile. As the 1880s progressed, Rudolph's emotional state deteriorated significantly. He felt trapped by his destiny, unable to influence policy or enact the reforms he so desperately believed in. His personal life was in disarray, and his health was failing. He spoke often of death and of his own despair. It was during this period of intense personal crisis that he met Baroness Mary Wetzera, a 17-year-old noblewoman. Mary was beautiful, spirited, and deeply infatuated with the Crown Prince, offering him a fleeting connection and a passionate escape from his bleak reality. Their affair became a desperate bond, a final embrace of life before the abyss. The tragic climax of Rudolph's life unfolded at Merling, a remote hunting lodge in the Vienna woods, on January 30, 1889. Crown Prince Rudolph and Baroness Mary Wetzera were found dead in his bedroom. The official court announcement released to the stunned public stated that Rudolph had died of a heart attack. This official story was quickly understood to be a cover-up. The true events, pieced together from various accounts and later confessions, painted a far more harrowing picture. In the hours before their deaths, Rudolph had written farewell letters to his mother, his wife, and his sister. He arrived at Merling on January 29th, joined by Mary Wetzera, who had been secretly brought to the lodge. The exact sequence of events that night remains subject to some debate, but the prevailing understanding is that Rudolph shot Mary Wetzera in her sleep or after a final embrace, and then several hours later shot himself. The bodies were discovered the next morning by Rudolph's valet, Loschek, and his close confidant, Count Hoyos. The discovery sent shockwaves to the imperial court and across Europe. The immediate priority of Emperor Franz Joseph and his advisors was to control the narrative and suppress the scandalous truth of a murder-suicide involving the Crown Prince and his young mistress. Mary Wetzera's body was hastily removed from Merling and secretly buried in a pauper's grave, with immense efforts made to obscure her presence at the lodge. The official story of a heart attack was pushed, but the whispers of suicide and scandal spread rapidly, fueled by the inconsistencies in the evident distress of the imperial family. The death of Crown Prince Rudolph at the age of 30 was a devastating blow to the Habsburg dynasty. It removed the only male heir in the direct line of succession, forcing the emperor to name his nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, as the new heir presumptive. More profoundly, it plunged Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elizabeth into a deep, enduring grief. The emperor, known for his stoicism, was visibly shattered by the loss of his only son, a son with whom he had a deeply complicated and often painful relationship. Empress Elizabeth, already fragile, became even more reclusive and melancholic, wearing black for the rest of her life as a symbol of her unending mourning. The Merling tragedy became one of the most infamous and enduring mysteries of the 19th century, inspiring countless books, plays, and films. It was a profound symbol of the decaying glamour of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, an empire whose foundations were already cracking under the weight of internal tensions and external pressures. Rudolph's death, a dramatic culmination of his personal struggles, and the stifling atmosphere of the court cast a long, dark shadow over the remaining years of Franz Joseph's reign, foreshadowing the turbulent future that awaited the Habsburg domains. His despair, his rebellion, and his final tragic act at Merling encapsulated the profound vulnerability and the hidden sorrows that lay beneath the glittering but ultimately fragile surface of one of Europe's greatest dynasties.